Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Rachel Zerin here with a thought for Shabbat. This coming week, on Wednesday night and Thursday, we will observe the holiday of Tisha B'Av, the date on the Jewish calendar on which both the first and second temples in Jerusalem were destroyed. A day that has become a sort of national day of mourning for the Jewish people, on which, tradition holds, numerous other tragedies have befallen us. This is a holiday observed with fasting and mourning practices, deemed so tragic by our rabbis that tradition holds we should even refrain from greeting one another or studying Torah because such activities bring too much joy. Not only is Tisha B'Av itself a day of mourning, but the weeks leading up to it are observed as a sort of pseudo-mourning period as well. Beginning on the 17th of Tammuz, when the walls of Jerusalem were breached and the city fell under siege, we observe the 3 weeks of partial mourning that the rabbis called Bein HaMitzarim, between the narrow places, a phrase that comes from the Book of Lamentations, which we chant on Tisha B'Av, and which evokes a powerful sense of what it must have felt like for our ancestors to live through that time. It also evokes a sense of what it must feel like for many of us when we all experience that feeling of being Bein HaMitzarim, between the narrow places, in that narrow, tense, anxious, constrained space that life sometimes finds us in. Now, it might seem odd to have an entire 3-week period of partial mourning and 1 day of intense, deep grieving designated on the Jewish calendar as a holiday, especially when we consider that grieving is over something that was destroyed over 2,000 years ago, a temple that we have little connection with today. And yet, I think there is great wisdom in our tradition in that we designate this holiday, this 1 day, to come together to mourn and grieve as a community. There can be great power in designating time to sit in our sadness over both the collective tragedies that have befallen our people and perhaps also those personal moments of feeling Bein HaMitzarim, in the narrow places. Allowing time to feel those emotions opens up space for other emotions to come in as well. Especially because sometimes we have to go to one extreme to find the other. And here I think about the connection between this phrase, Bein HaMitzarim, between the narrow places, and a very similar phrase that comes up in one of the Psalms that we sing in Hallel. Every Rosh Chodesh, every holiday, we sing from the Psalms, Min HaMeitzar Karati Yah, Anani V'Merchav Yah. From the narrow places, Min HaMeitzar, I called to you, God. God answered me in the broad expanses of the divine. Sometimes it takes going deep into that narrow place to find that broad divine expanse. That is what the psalm is teaching us, and perhaps that is what this time in our calendar teaches us as well. Because yes, while we have these 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av of narrowness and constraint, leading to this holiday of deeply sitting in our sadness and our grief, that period launches us into our preparations for the high holidays and the high holiday season itself, when we experience that Merchav Yah, that broad expanse of the divine, and hopefully hear the answer to our calls. Immediately following Tisha B'Av, we encounter 7 weeks up to Rosh Hashanah, where we read 7 haftarot of consolation, where we lean into not grief but comfort, And then we find ourselves in the high holiday season when we continue to call out to God, but hear those calls answered, culminating in Sukkot when we open ourselves up to the heavens and feel that answer from the broad expanse. I hope that you will all join us this Wednesday night and Thursday as we sit in those narrow places and observe Tisha B'Av together as a community. And I hope that by leaning into those narrow places, we all feel in even greater ways that broad expanse of the divine, that joy and openness that will come in just a few more weeks later. Shabbat Shalom.